Hi there. I wanted to follow up a little bit on what I was trying to do with stuff that was happening, a couple of years ago with J.P. Marceau's take on C.S. Lewis and C.S. Lewis' Miracles, which I'm kind of getting into, and what was milling around in this corner a year and a half ago concerning emergence and immanence. And I'm kind of revisiting some of these dialogues, like the dialogue, dialogos between Paul van der Klee, the three saints of this corner, van der Klee, Pageau, and Vervaeke. So in the article J.P. Marceau wrote, he explained that naturalism as we know it includes emergence. This is what I understand so far. And of course, there are things that emerge from lower forms that can't be explained by those lower forms. And in some cases, can't even be parsed out from those constituents, and that would be strong emergence. So in short, modern naturalism accepts that there are phenomena that aren't reducible to atoms. And Vervaeke calls this, I think, irreducible physicalism, so y'all can correct me on this if I'm wrong. So this understanding of levels and emergence is a big part of the metaphysics of quality and the whole four evolutionary levels. And that's why I think Pirsig is really useful as a tool to understanding some of this stuff. And I hope to, now that I'm finished doing Lila and everything, that I can go forward and revisit some of this stuff and pull him back in to the conversation. So let me read something that Pirsig says, and this is from the chapter where he starts talking about the levels, where he really explains how he comes to understanding the emergent levels. And he says, evolution can't be a continuous forward movement. It must be a process of ratchet-like steps in which there's a dynamic movement forward, up some new incline. Okay, now, new incline. Keep that in mind, what he's saying here. And then, if the result looks successful, a static latching on of the gain that has been made, and then another dynamic advance, and then another static latch. So he's using the language of the hierarchy. So the levels that JP refers to, in which the level above it has emerged and this has been carefully described in Lila in this chapter. And of course, in the metaphysics of quality, the way that these levels develop, like I just read, is a relationship of static and dynamic. And so here Pirsig is describing it in terms of the evolution of the first form of life. And that the thing that's so mystifying to us and so interesting to us is that emergence that happened, and this is strong emergence, you cannot explain it in terms of its constituent elements. You can't explain life in terms of molecules. You just can't. It's like the problem of consciousness. You cannot explain life in terms of its constituent elements. So this is what he says about the emergence of DNA. What the dynamic force had to invent in order to move up the molecular level and stay there was a carbon molecule that would preserve its limited dynamic freedom from the inorganic laws and at the same time resist deterioration back to simple compounds of carbon again. A study of nature shows the dynamic force was not able to do this, but got around the problem by inventing two molecules, a static molecule able to resist abrasion, heat, chemical attack, and the like, and a dynamic one able to preserve the subatomic indeterminacy at a molecular level and try everything in the ways of chemical combination. So that's the structure of DNA. You've got the protein that preserves this dynamic center. And that's the structure of reality. And I think if we dug down into this, and I hope to go there, that the Pageau model, the Pageau metaphysics, is going to line up beautifully with this, is going to map on beautifully with this. When you're talking to evolutionary types, these evolutionary progressive biologists and whatnot, who I respect, I'm not disparaging what they do, but there's kind of there's a simplicity, even though what they talk about is very complicated. There's a simplicity to their approach. There's a reductionism to their approach, and they may not be reducing everything to atoms per se, but they're trying to put a single lens on all the levels. And the most notable one being explaining away social patterns with evolutionary biology, which is like the only reason we ever do anything is because ultimately what we really want to do is put forward our genes, like make sure our genes exist into the future. But in Pirsig's theory, and this is really important, and I think this is where he's going to be really helpful in this discussion. I know this discussion's old, but I think it's still going on. I think it's still, let's just say there's a static latch in this discussion that's really important to understand, and it's I think relevant to go back and investigate it. In Pirsig's theory, each level that has emerged has its own set of moral directives. These moral directives are often in conflict with the upper and lower levels. And these products of this emergence fight to live on their own terms and in a way that kind of mirrors the language of evolution. But the thing about evolutionary biology, like I said, is it's saying that everything is genes. And Pirsig's evolutionary levels is saying, yeah, maybe in biology you could say that everything is genes to some extent. But really, every level has its own agenda. And the social level isn't about genes. The social level is about social morality. And in that social morality is where you're going to find organized religion, for one thing. So this is why Pageau and Weinstein have such an interesting but ultimately unsatisfying discourse. Like Paul Vanderklay said, it was kind of, all over the place and a mess. It's because Pageau is talking about the pattern of how the universe drives itself upwards always. The endless climb and fall and climbing back up that infinite mountain. So he's talking about the metaphysical principle of all of reality. And Weinstein sees this continual desire to put genes forward into the future. And what Weinstein is seeing as a way forward, that's true. So there is a climbing up the hierarchy, but he's reducing it to biology and not seeing the big picture of that continuous climb up the value hierarchy that, again, underlies all of reality. So when is there a failure if everything is headed up the mountain? What is the falling back down that Pageau refers to? So this progression up the mountain can be dragged down by lower levels becoming too dominant, like taking over a higher level. The agenda of the lower levels become too dominant. And the progression can also be stunted by, let's say, let's use an old Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance term, the anxiety trap, which is the desire of the product of the quality event. Think back to, how the DNA evolved to become this thing, that's the product of a quality event. It wants to protect itself so badly that perhaps, like say those proteins cut off. I don't know enough about molecular biology, so excuse me. But let's just say that those proteins weren't there to protect the dynamic center of the DNA, that it was so worried that the dynamism would it wants to protect itself so badly, it becomes so rigid that eventually it becomes too rigid, and then it disintegrates, it falls apart, it becomes dry. Like in the Tao Te Ching, don't be too dry, be flexible, like a I think it's something like a newborn child. I can't remember. Sorry, but there's a flexibility. Don't be a reed don't be a dry reed. Be a reed that can go with the wind. But when the reed becomes too dry, when the protective layer, let's say, becomes too rigid because of anxiety, ultimately, if you want to use a little panpsychism, then eventually that is going to be too rigid and it's going to fall apart. So that's one way you go back down the mountain. There's also the value trap, which means that the upper level becomes so cocky that it separates itself from the lower levels that support it. And the meaning crisis could be potentially described as the intellectual level separating itself from society and becoming too enamored of its own reflection and disparaging the social level that it came from. And that's a really important concept in the meaning crisis and in Pirsig. Now, I have a few notes I want to share. I want to share as I'm working through this whole thing that the J.P. Marceau and Miracles and the Dharmakaya light have evoked in me concerning dynamic quality per se. So let's say, and Neoplatonism, all this great stuff that's coming up. Let's say Neoplatonism gives you the unknown God in Deidre Carabin's words. And so the unknown God, you will never know what this is. It will always be hidden. You only have a sense of it. But that unknown God expresses himself like a golden thread that sinks its knot into the ground of being and then pulls all levels of manifest reality up towards the summit of that infinite mountain. That thread is a dynamic quality, I think. And sometimes that thread can, when this happens, sometimes in the best case scenario, that thread unites all the levels into a single event towards a miraculous newness that has never been seen. So let's say the attribute of the unknown God, the one, is forever moving, is that forever moving golden thread, an animating force, a way of being that allows migration towards what's better. That is the way of migration towards what's better. So let's say manifest reality as we know it. We live in a material manifest world, at least our experiences of that. Let's just say that manifest reality is a radio, and this dynamic quality is the signal. This attribute, this dynamic quality of the principle of quality of the good, is what C.S. Lewis refers to, I believe, when he says supernatural. And there is something beyond us shaking the fish tank, and I believe it is this. So this Dharmakaya light I referred to last week, is probably more than that now, is a sign that if you can perceive it, if you tap into this golden thread, into this dynamic quality, is a sign that this attribute is at work in the most potent of ways, and when this potency is achieved, that is miraculous. Now, in terms of this thread breaking through all levels, like J.P. Marceau was talking about, I want to revisit one of my favorite passages of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which this must be the 6th or 7th time I've referred to this. The subliminal self, this is about Henri Poincare, who really was a breakthrough for Phaedrus to develop the metaphysics quality, to actually understand quality in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, actually to understand the pre-intellectual awareness of quality, the quality event, let's say. The subliminal self, Poincare said, looks at a large number of solutions to a problem, but only the interesting ones break into the domain of consciousness. Mathematical solutions are selected by the subliminal self on the basis of mathematical beauty, of the harmony of numbers and forms, of geometric elegance. This is a true aesthetic feeling which all mathematicians know, Poincare said, but which the profane are so ignorant as often to be tempted to smile. But it is this harmony, this beauty, that is at the center, important word, of it all. Relevance realization, the top of the hierarchy. So I know this is all a little vague. I'm kind of working this stuff out, so help me with some thoughts, and I hope this made sense. It probably didn't, and I will see you next time.